Hello? All right, cool. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Manetti Stream Museum of Art. My name is Zion Goodnight. I'm a music major here at UC Davis. I'm going to be graduating in 2027, and I currently serve as a visitor service assistant here in the museum. Now, before we begin today's program, we should take a moment to acknowledge the land on which UC Davis sits. For thousands of years, this land has been the home of the Potwin people. Today, there are three federally recognized Potwin tribes: the Kutchil-Dee Band of Winton Indians of the Calusa Indian Community, Quetzal-Dee Winton Nation, and the Yocha-Dee Winton Nation. The Potwin people have remained committed to the stewardship of this land over many centuries. It has been cherished and protected, as elders have instructed the young through generations. We are honored and so grateful to be here today over their traditional lands. On behalf of myself and the museum staff, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Good evening, everyone. Before we start, just want to make sure everyone silences their cell phones. My name is Chella Costanza. I'm a second-year graduate student in the Maria Manetti Schrem Art Studio program. Before I begin, I would like to thank Maria Manetti Schrem for her visionary support of the arts at UC Davis. Today's speaker comes to UC Davis through the California studio Maria Manetti Schrem Artist Residencies, a visiting artist program in the Maria Manetti Schrem Art Studio program. The program brings 5 internationally renowned artists annually to teach and work with the students in Art Studio. I would like to thank the Maria Manetti Schrem Art Studio faculty for inviting such extraordinary artists to campus. We hope that you'll join us for future lectures. The painter Byron Kim will be here to give a lecture on Thursday, April 24th, and on Thursday, May 1st. Rebecca Bollinger will be here to give a talk as well. All lectures begin at 4:30 and are held here in the museum. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce Marie Lorenz, a New York-based artist whose innovative work seamlessly blends sculpture, video, printmaking, and performance to explore the intricate relationship between urban environments and their waterways. Since 2005, Marie has been at the helm of her ongoing project, the Tide and Current Taxi, navigating New York's waterways in boats that she designs and constructs herself. By harnessing tidal currents, she offers participants unique voyages that reveal the city's landscapes from the perspective of its rivers and harbors. These explorations not only uncover overlooked and inaccessible areas, but also serve as a platform for collecting debris, which Marie uses in her compelling artworks across various mediums. Her dedication to examining the confluence of natural forces and human activity has led to numerous solo exhibitions, including Waterways at Bennington College in Vermont, Ash Heap/Landfill at the Lamar Dodd School of Art in Georgia, and Ezekiel at the Albright Knox Art Gallery in Buffalo, New York. Marie holds a BFA from Rhode Island School of Design and an MFA from Yale University. Her exceptional contributions to the arts have been recognized with prestigious awards, including the Joseph H. Hazen Rome Prize from the American Academy in Rome and grants from the Creative Capital and the National Endowment for the Arts. Tonight, we have the opportunity to delve into Marie's artistic journey and gain insights into her unique approach to art making. Please join me in welcoming Marie Lorenz.
Hello. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thanks for that great introduction. I have to silence my phone also. And thanks for, it's been an amazing first couple weeks on campus. Thank you all who have been part of inviting me to this awesome program. I'm gonna tell you about my work starting from when I was an undergrad at Rhode Island School of Design, because I think we have some undergrad art students in the room today. So it's always really fun to talk about what I was doing in that era. So I went to RISD in the 1990s when they were making this massive construction project to daylight the Woonasquatucket River, which runs right through the middle of Providence. This is a picture that was taken in the 1970s of downtown Providence with the train tracks and I-95 basically sitting over the Woonasquatucket River. And when I was in school there, it was like the whole downtown was like this muddy construction site where they were lifting the infrastructure off of the river. I had never lived in a city before. I was like from the suburbs, and it was just this amazing, like they were revealing this river, and I started to make little boats to go in the canals that were revealed by the daylighting project. I now realize that I was in the sewer, but at the time, it was like these amazing tunnels. You could get in a tunnel in the Woonasquatucket River, and you could disappear for like miles underneath the city if you were in a tiny boat. So I started making these little boats and navigating those waterways. This was one of the boats that I made. The first boat that I made was like an aluminum. I took sheet aluminum and stretched it over a plywood frame. It was like the cheapest way that I could figure out how to do it. And then this is a bridge that has since been deconstructed in Providence. And I had this boat and others sort of strung up underneath the bridge. So if you knew they were under there, you could crawl down underneath the bridge, lower the boats on pulleys, and go out into the canals. So it was like a little like clubhouse that I had with some friends underneath the bridges in downtown Providence. Because downtown Providence, people would just sort of walk over the canals, not even look at the water, because they were sort of used to that being this polluted kind of industrial area. And then, and so that's one of the boats that I made also. I started just using scrap wood, and I started using roofing pitch to seal the wood. And then wherever I moved in the US after that, I was looking for that same kind of landscape where the city and the water come together. Because to me, those spaces are where there's this sort of uncertain area where you can kind of see the back end of the city, all the parts of the city that the city planners and the architects don't really want you to see. Or at least at that time, it sort of felt like it. I feel like in the past, maybe decade, there's been more attention to the waterfront, thinking about those spaces as sort of, I don't know, real estate investments and things, but at the time, they were just these sort of derelict areas. And this actually, I dug up these pictures because this is actually in India Basin in San Francisco. Right after RISD, I moved to San Francisco and lived there for about 4 years in the late 1990s, and I was looking for that same kind of space. I was making boats at that time out of plywood. I would make these plywood sort of frames, almost like skeletons, and then I would stretch canvas over the skeleton and use roofing pitch to seal the canvas. And that's how I would make those sort of really kind of sweeping forms and kind of like sloping curves. It was all just a thin layer of canvas over this skeleton. And at the time, I sort of thought I was making these almost like little vignettes, almost my ideal sort of audience at the time would be somebody that's walking by this derelict sort of polluted waterway and sees something happening out in the waterway and thinks about the waterway in a different way. And I dug up this picture too, just because I knew I might have some Bay Area people in the room. This was my roommates at the time were in this jazz band, and they didn't get invited to play at this jazz festival. And I was looking at the picture and trying to figure out where this was. I kind of think it was in Mission Creek, but I would love to pore over maps of San Francisco with somebody and think about like where this was and what's there now, because I have a feeling that Mission Creek looks very different than it did in the 1990s. But it was just, there were these sort of broken down piers, and the jazz festival was in this like, you know, big empty warehouse that was on the shore of Mission Creek. And so they weren't asked to play the festival, but they wanted me to like sort of drag them close to the festival because they heard that weekend that nobody was inside. It was like the first nice day of the year. Everybody was on this dock that was like right next to the warehouse. And so they bought this little amplifier and they put it in the boat, and I dragged the boat and them up to the pier, and everybody from the jazz festival left the festival and came out and watched them perform. So I moved to New York in 2002, and I started to do what everybody had been recommending when they saw those boats with the stretched canvas. I downloaded plans from the internet, and I started using plywood and fiberglass instead of the roofing pitch. The New York Harbor was a much busier place than all of those waterways that I had been exploring, and I needed something that would withstand that kind of traffic, those kind of distances, and just a more active waterway. So this is the boat that I built in 2005 to navigate the New York Harbor. I did a circumnavigation in 2005 of Manhattan Island, like leaving from Greenpoint and coming back to Greenpoint 3 days later. A good kayaker can do that in about 8 hours, but we did it in 3 days because we had no idea what we were doing in terms of the tide. We were also camping along the way and sort of trying to treat New York as a wilderness, sort of trying to see it as, instead of all the subway schedules and traffic routes that people usually take, we were navigating it by water and thinking about it like a tidal journey. On that trip, because of that 3-day journey that could have been 8 hours, I realized the significance of the force of the tide in the New York Harbor. They say that the New York Harbor has the second fastest tidal current in the world, and it's true. The tide can be going up to 6 knots in the East River, an incredible amount of force that's playing against a small boat. And I also, when I did the circumnavigation, so this is like in 2005, it was before Instagram. And so but I wanted to put this project online. So I had a friend, I had a little flip phone, and I was emailing my friend who was at home on her computer images on the flip phone, and also writing a little line of text. And she was uploading it to a website as I went around Manhattan. So you could tune into this website and you could sort of see my progress as I went around. So basically we invented Instagram in 2005. And, but it was cool because at that point, I sort of, instead of thinking about the performance being something that you watch me do in the water, now I thought of the performance as something that you look through back at the city. So you're looking through your computer, through me, through my camera, through the boat, and back at basically your own position in the city. And that's when learning how to navigate the tide and learn how to use the internet in conjunction with these projects, I started the Tide and Current Taxi that same summer in 2005. I emailed everybody I knew, and I said, you tell me a place that you want to go in New York City, and I'll tell you when we go there based on the tidal current. And this is the first person that responded, a total stranger. He had been sort of forwarded the email through friends, and he responded with where he wanted to go. I think in the email I told everybody that I would take them to work. He wasn't really going to work, but we sort of made believe that he was going to work. And we set out in the East River. We sank in the middle of the East River and had to swim to Roosevelt Island. I look at this picture now and I'm like, how did I even think this would work? He's like so big compared to that boat. And we've got all this junk in the boat. I'm like, what was I doing? But we had to swim to shore. And when I got home that night, I was like, oh my God, that was such a mistake. I was about to email everybody that had signed up for the Tide taxi and tell them it doesn't work, never mind. But Joe Potts' roommate had emailed me that day and said, Joe told me everything, sounds great, please sign me up, I can swim. And so I thought, maybe the project can still go on, but I just have to sort of change my routes a little bit, plan a little better, and people should know what could be in store. So this was the next boat that I built for the next summer for the project, but the Tide taxi has been like 4 different boats throughout that 20 years that it's been happening. And the boat that I made now, that I use now, I think of as sort of the perfect boat to be in a small boat in the New York Harbor. This was sort of halfway there, but now the boat is a little bigger and has curved sides, which get over the wake a little better. Nothing like that has ever happened again. And the Tide and Current Taxi has been going strong for 20 years. I used the Eldridge Tide and Pilot book to predict the tide, which is totally predictable because it's the gravitational pull of the moon and sun. So if somebody in the room wanted to go on a Tide taxi trip in like May of 2026, May 21st of 2026, I could tell you exactly what time of day the tide changes direction on that day because it's all based on the moon and the sun. And so I use the Eldridge guide it gives me a map of the direction that the currents are going, and then I cross-reference that with, a GPS or or like a tidal app where I can learn what the high and low tide of the day will be. And I've been doing that the same way since 2005. I have a blog that I publish about the trip, and the blog has looked pretty much the same since 2005. It's just an image and a line of text that tells sort of the story of the trip. I love showing this picture when I talk about the blog. This is from 2005, and this is a friend who used to live in an abandoned building on the Greenpoint waterfront in 2005, and now that space where his abandoned squat used to be is like a glittering condominium with like a beautiful lawn in front of it. So you can imagine that all of that waterfront space has really changed since 2005. I think more than any other part of New York City, the waterfront has changed. And so I think of it, they say there's 520 miles of coastline in New York City, and I probably have a picture from 20 years of navigating the tide of every mile of coastline in New York City. But not just every mile, I have pictures of those miles going back to 2025. So I think of it as an archive in space as well as in time. I always save about a third of the trips that I take in the Tide Taxi for total strangers that find out about the trips online. The way that'll happen a lot is that people are looking for a place in New York, North Brother Island, doing a Google search for something like that, and pictures that I've taken on my blog will show up in the Google search, and then they'll find out about the project and request a trip. That happens so frequently that this is Mike Olshan. He's a journalist, and he found out about the Tide Taxi through that way, looking for something, and didn't realize that it was an art project. He literally just really needed to get to this sunken submarine in the Coney Island Creek, and I was the only way he could think of to get there. So much so that when we were out in the boat, he knew I was an artist, so he was like, "What is your art like?" And I was like, "You're in it. This is it." So more abandoned spaces. I also think of the project as a way to connect really disparate kinds of spaces in New York City. This is East River, headed south, Navy Yard on the left, and Manhattan on the right. Very busy place. And this is about 6 miles away, City Island in the Bronx. Couldn't be, I feel like when I look at these pictures, I'm like, it's like two different countries. But you could get there on the right tide in about an hour and a half. And it would take about that long to get there by subway. So I think when I started doing this project, navigating the city waterways with the tide, I was thinking about it sort of in terms of almost like a Guy Debord's dérivé. It's like using the wrong map of the city to navigate this incredibly known space. But I think the more that I do the trips and the more that I sort of research the city with this unusual way, I think of it as the right way to see the city or to understand the way that the city is laid out. But increasingly doing the project, it's becoming more and more about pollution. You can imagine that I see a lot of junk out there in the Tide Taxi, and also there's lots of things that you can't see that are a result of, man's relationship with nature. This is a picture of a pretty famously polluted waterway in New York called the Gowanus Canal, which has an oil spill that's just sort of bubbling up at all times. And you can see these really beautiful oil slicks on the surface of the canal. They're actually dredging the Gowanus. Since this picture was taken, they're undergoing this huge project to dredge the Gowanus Canal, but it's still pretty gross. And this picture was taken I had a weather balloon and a camera dangling from the weather balloon. So that's how I got that aerial picture in like 2013. There's a lot of islands in New York City that are made of landfill. Most of the islands around New York have been sort of like modified for the shipping channel and also increased in scale with landfill. So this is one of my favorite places to go, Shooter's Island in New York. And it's the earth of the island is literally made of garbage. About half of it is made of garbage. But it's also a place where a lot of garbage collects. And it's a place where you can really observe this amazing phenomenon of the harbor sorting all the garbage out and kind of delivering it to different areas, different beaches around the harbor. So this beach is on sort of the north side of the island, and it's filled with all of this floatable debris, basketballs and nets and driftwood and timber. A lot of the driftwood that you see on the islands is not like a tree fell over. It's like construction timber that has been sort of washing around in the harbor. And this is only about maybe 100 yards around the coast of the island on the eastern shore. And this is all the junk that has floated up on the bottom of the Arthur Kill waterway, which is where this island is situated. So it's all these bottles, ceramic, bricks, and even the soil is made out of slag, which is a byproduct of making steel. So so even like the sand that looks sort of black is actually just an industrial byproduct. I've been using a lot of that junk and also just the idea of that kind of drifting centrifuge in my artwork. This is a show that I had at Jack Hanley Gallery in 2014. And you can see I made this installation that looked like sort of like a wrecked pier. And you can see some of the sculptural installations in the back, and also a print that I made that was meant to look like sort of this language of objects that had been washed up from the waterfront. This is a jet ski that I printed in 2011, I think. A jet ski that I found in the New York Harbor in Jamaica Bay, and this print is actually a little bigger than it's showing up here. It's about 11 feet tall and 16 feet wide. And I've made it by inking panels of the jet ski and sort of rolling it over in my studio and inking the next panel. So it looks like it's deconstructed, but that's actually, the hull was intact when I made that print just by inking the sections of it. But the jet ski is something that I have returned to a lot. This is a show that I was in at Columbia University's Wallet Gallery. It just came down in January, but it was up for maybe 6 months. And it's a show about the Hudson River, looking at the sort of Hudson River School painters and trying to reimagine that landscape in a more holistic way. There were some really great artists in that show. The show was called Shifting Shorelines. And they commissioned this piece, which was a jet ski that I cast from a jet ski I found out in the harbor. I'll show you images of that in a minute. But it was really funny because I had to really make sure that the museum didn't say in their kind of didactic information about the piece that the artist doesn't like jet skis or is sort of like critical of jet skis, because I actually sort of love them. There's these guys that ride around on jet skis in the New York Harbor in groups of like 15 jet skis, and they're like the Harley Davidson riders of the sea or something. They're just like so like wild, and they actually like will chase the ferry boats in the New York Harbor and like jump off of their wake and stuff. And they're just like, I feel like it's this flamboyant expression of like peak oil. I feel like artists can be at once amazed by something, in love with something, and also sort of critical of it. And there was a student that wrote and actually it was sort of a scathing review of the entire show in the Columbia student newspaper. But they said something really cool about this piece, which was, the piece introduces an eerie sense that the river, having existed long before all of us, will outlive us and consume the tools that we have used to degrade it. So that was what Liam Downey, in the midst of this very scathing review of the show, said about that piece, which I thought was really cool. Way better than sort of the museum didactics had been about like sort of, I always had to sort of veer them away from saying that I was just critiquing owners of jet skis or riders of jet skis, because really I feel like it's sort of more nuanced than that. I can sort of be amazed and love them, as well as kind of like be amazed at how, what a strange thing we've created. The steel structure, so this is, I'll show you how I cast it, but the steel structure that's holding up the jet ski is meant to look like museum sort of braces and armatures that are meant to hold up artifacts. This is a museum in just outside Rome in Italy, where these amazing Roman ships have been preserved. Actually, they were preserved for a long time, and then The US bombed them during World War II, and they incinerated the whole museum, but they saved parts of that, and this is like one of the remaining little scraps of ship that's left from the Nemi ships. And I love that museum architecture where it's kind of like offering it to you, but then also like bracing it like some kind of a constraint or something. And I really love that kind of steel structure that's like holding up the artifact in its most sort of glorious state, but also sort of confining it. The jet ski that I used for this one, I did not take back to my studio. I cast it out at a site in Jamaica Bay where it's like a ship graveyard, or a ship, not really a graveyard, but like a salvage yard. And it took me a really long time to sort of like woo the salvage yard owner because he was very suspicious of my activities in the salvage yard. I have a feeling there's some maybe like stolen things like around there, but he was very suspicious of what I wanted and like why I wanted that boat. And like the minute, I mean, these are like, there's like 10 jet skis that are absolute derelict like pieces of garbage on the beach. But the minute I expressed an interest in that one, he started talking about how valuable it was, and this was his cousin's. And so I had to promise that I wasn't gonna destroy the jet ski, that everything I was doing was like reversible, but I was able to pull casts off of it and then cast clay and hydrocal back into those negative shapes in a process that involves, I'll show you a little bit more about the process when I show what I'm doing at Kohler, but it's a process where I'm going back and forth between the negative and positive. In some cases, like with the handlebars of the jet ski, I actually just squashed clay around the handlebars, lifted it off, and then poured hydrocal into that negative space. But on the sides and the seat and things, I was doing this like sort of positive negative process. And the idea is that it's supposed to look like this jet ski has been sort of crumpled underground and kind of rotting together with all of these other pieces of plastic that are floating around the harbor. So some of those pieces are like this orange construction net and some other kind of recognizable like plastic parts that are kind of supposed to look like they're rotting with the jet ski. So I'm gonna switch gears for a minute and talk about another site-based project that I did with Kurt Rohde, who's sitting in the very back of the room. Kurt Rohde is a professor in the music department at Davis, and it's really, really exciting to be here because I'll be able to work with Kurt again. We collaborated on an opera in 2023. This is a picture of the opening night. It was set on the Newtown Creek and performed on the Newtown Creek in October of that year, but September of that year. To introduce it though, I wanted to read something that our friend David Humphrey wrote about it, because I feel like Kurt and I both kind of like, or I do at least, kind of bumble around when people ask, what is it? Because it was so much. And here's what David Humphrey said about it. Newtown Odyssey recasts opera as a guided tour performed along America's most polluted waterway, the Newtown Creek in New York City. The artist Marie Lorenz, musician Kurt Rohde, and librettist Dana Spiotta have crafted a mytho-historic voyage in which location and audience are protagonists along with the performers. Waste and toxicity inflect the musical ebb and flow. Scientists, developers, a ghost, and a creek being drive the narrative. Two words from the libretto are emblematic of the whole, flotsamatic and hydrophilic. So the opera was performed, as David Humphrey so awesomely wrote, at this site on the Newtown Creek. Half the audience was on shore and followed those scenes that he talked about, the developer, the scientist, the guides down the shore, and half the audience was in boats, and they followed the performance as it went down the shore. So that's the sort of boat half of the audience, and one of the scenes is sort of percolating there on that raft. This is the final scene when you meet the creek being itself that sort of speaks on behalf of the creek to the audience that's gathered on shore and in boats. It was a really amazing thing to collaborate on, and Kurt's going to be doing a performance on June 6th at the Arboretum. Actually, Kurt and Robin are going to do a performance with their classes on June 6th at the Arboretum, and it should be a really awesome endeavor as well. I wanted to show a couple images of the things that I was making that led up to that performance, and then some of the kind of little arms that have come off of it that have become more work recently. And that's because that's what I want to work on when I'm here at UC Davis. It was so amazing to work with Kurt and work with musicians, work with performers. It really made me think about sculpture and the waterfront in a different way. At some point, Kurt asked me to make I think the sort of prompt was a musical instrument that could play itself. And this was what I came up with. So this is like a year or two before the opera even happened, when we were just sort of like wondering what a performance could be on the waterfront. And this is the thing that I made. So made by so you can sort of tell what's happening. These two buoys are sort of interacting to strum the ukulele. Kurt sent me 5 ukuleles, and I made, at some point for one of the first iterations of the opera, though there were 5 of those sort of ukulele buoys kind of strumming along with the performers. This was another iteration of sort of a sound producing floating instrument. This was sort of leading up to, I'll show you what it ended up looking like in the end, but this is kind of a cool practice getting ready for it. The whole piece, when it fit together, looked like that. And the idea with it is that the boat is rocking on 3 different axes, and there's sort of a sound being generated that's different depending on how the boat's rocking. And so it has to do with sort of the 3 directions of nautical motion, and then kind of trying to activate a different sound along each of those directions. So the bass drum is in I guess that's called the pitch, when a boat is sort of rocking back and forth. Oh yeah, here's an image, or here's just a video of it moving. Unfortunately, I shot this with a drone, so there's no sound to it, but it sounds cool. It sounds like all of that tinkling. But here's what it looked like in the Catskill Creek. And Kurt and I did a performance with this in 2002 in the Hudson River, while we were sort of leading up to the opera that was in the Newtown Creek. But you can see there's sort of a diagonal axis, a sort of a side-to-side axis, and then that pitch that's hitting the bass drum. This was the sort of sound-producing set that I made for the opera. It was meant to, there was a lot of electronic. When you saw that image of the first image of the opera, we added a lot of electronic equipment to that. But here's what the kind of just the kind of chime elements were in that. And then you can also see in the background, this is the site where we had the opera, and I think this was like a day or 2 before the performance, and you can, as the camera swings back around, you can see the platforms and the kind of stage that we built getting ready for the opera. And that sort of gives you an idea of what the site was like where we had it. And working with motion and sound made me start to think about sculpture in a different way. I was I think it was making those big rings in the boat that sort of made me think about that rocking motion. And I started making these metronomes that I hope to keep working on in my studio this month. These were, they're all the elements, the kind of heavy elements at the top and the bottom are cast with hydrocal, using some of that same method that I made the jet ski, where I squash objects into clay and then pour hydrocal into that. So they have a very heavy side and a very light side, and it makes this pendulum motion. I was thinking about, of course, the pendulum keeps time in music. I think of them as sort of imitating the way a boat rocks or the way a paddle moves through the water. But I'm also interested in them in terms of their relationship to navigation, because this is the way I had a show at Jack Hanley Gallery in just this last October, and this is the way, these are new ones that were in the Jack Hanley show. I guess the way that they relate to navigation is that advancements in the chronometer in the 18th century, so using a pendulum to tell time, was what gave navigators in the 18th century the key to longitude, and that allowed navigators to basically map the globe, European navigators to map the globe. And so in a way, the pendulum marks time, but because of the chronometer, it also marks space, and sort of was the key that Europe was missing when they were navigating the globe. Before that, they were navigating with dead reckoning, which is the nautical term for guessing. They would basically just like kind of guess how fast they were going and then guess how far they had gone based on that. And so the chronometer allowed them to very succinctly tell how far they had gone, which gave them the key to longitude. So the pendulum to me is sort of this idea of mapping space as well as time. And I also made prints that were in that show, that Jack Hanley show. They're all these contact prints that have been adhered through wet mounting onto a larger piece of paper. So I was able to make contact prints and then collage them onto these big pieces of paper with this wet mounting process. They're all, some of them are sort of almost representational. Like I think of them as these like shipwrecks and islands of debris. And some of them are just quite abstract with just ideas of horizons and things floating. I am really influenced by a Japanese printmaker named Saburo Hasegawa. There was I was introduced to his work in this great show that was at the Noguchi Museum in 2019. He was actually, he was Noguchi's translator when Noguchi took his first trip to Japan in the 1950s. He was sort of assigned by the Japanese government to show Noguchi around, but they had all these great conversations about modernism, about Japanese form, and the show that was at the Noguchi Museum was incredible. I just am so jealous of the way, and all the prints were made by the same process that I use, where it's just an object inked up and pressed onto a piece of paper, almost like a stamp. But Saburo's, if you can find that show online or anything about Saburo Hasegawa, he's really incredible. And there's just something so alive and rare about the way his compositions are like these things kind of just washed up on the page. There's nothing, each one is sort of perfect and absolutely incredible. A lot of them you can kind of tell that it's like construction debris and kind of offcuts from building projects, but it's all just really beautiful work and really great when you think about that in relation to Noguchi's work as well. That's what the studio looks like when I'm making these prints. I love sharing the process with a room full of, well, a room at least partially filled with artists, because it's fun to show you guys how the work comes to be. And this is so I don't use a printing press when I make any of those prints. I'm just printing it on the floor, and I sort of set up the paper. I use Kozo paper, and I set it up in these giant rolls that are kind of lifted by pulleys up to the ceiling, and that's the way I kind of press the paper down and lift it up. This is a print that was in a show in France, made partially with that wet mounting process and these contact prints that I made, and then partially with just these inked stencils that I'm printing by hand. I had a show at an art center in Montbéliard, France, this past summer. And in that show, I was collecting, that's a boat that I made in Europe and took on the canals in France. It's a really interesting place. this museum is in an old Peugeot factory. And the factories are there because this is the canal, this is the region that connects the Rhone and the Rhine River in Europe. So these canals that connect this region connect you with all Northern Europe and all the way to the south of France. So it was a really important region for industry and for the car manufacturing industry. And so I built a boat years ago in the Netherlands, and then used it in France to collect all this junk and make prints out of it using that same method. The print in the back was using that wet mount method where I printed all the junk. Some of this is from the New York Harbor, and then some of it I found in the canals in France. They said that the canals were going to be too clean for me to find any garbage, but I did find it. And that's the print that I made. Here's the print up close, so you can see that technique of printing things through contact printing and then cutting it out and using a wet mount process to adhere that all together. If anybody in the room is in my print class, I'll show you how to do that. It's really fun. And you can make these giant things that are sort of larger than the press bed. So I'm almost through with my talk today. But I wanted to show you what I'm working on right now, because this is something that you can apply for. I'm doing a Kohler residency, or I'm just finishing a Kohler residency at the Kohler factory in Wisconsin. It's a sprawling factory where they make really fancy toilet bowls. And you can have a residency on the factory floor where they're making the toilet bowls. It's like the most amazing thing. This is just part of the factory, and this is the factory looking into the area where all the slip cast molds are, where they make the toilet bowls. And this is the most exciting slide in my whole lecture, because taking pictures in the factory is totally illegal. So this is like contraband that I'm showing you right now, because they say that there are like trade secrets inside of this photograph that, like, if they got out, would, you know, just sink the company or something. I don't think so really, but it's when you're in there, it's just the most incredible experience to be right on the factory floor, looking at this process and kind of integrating yourself into this like really incredible process, this really incredible industrial process. I did the residency in 2017. You can do it either in metal or in pottery, and I chose the ceramic side. And I was making a slip cast of all this garbage. I mailed myself like 50 pounds of garbage from the New York Harbor in 2017. I did it again in 2025. Some of it was actually the same stuff that I mailed myself in 2017, because like you would think that the garbage in the New York Harbor is all sort of ubiquitous and the same, but there's actually stuff that's like I found it in like 2005 and then never found it again. So I have things like the garbage sort of changes over time in the New York Harbor, and so I have like my favorite little debris that I found. But I made slip casts of it, and then I would squash and alter the wet slip when it came out of the mold. So that way I started out with like, maybe 30 or 40 molds, and then I made thousands of different objects with all the molds. This was an installation. This was the 2017 residency, and I made an installation that was at the Buffalo Art Museum and also traveled to the Des Moines Art Center. And it was this massive, so there's like 2,000 pieces of garbage cast in porcelain that are in this cube that was 40 feet by 40 feet. This is a video of, they let me ride up on a scissor lift, and so I took a video of the debris as it was going up. All manner of things, some recognizable, some sort of so squashed that it was sort of beyond recognition. But this is all the different kinds of stuff. I was sort of worried when I made the installation. It was such a massive space, and some of the objects are like these tiny objects that you wouldn't be able to see that high into the space to know what it was. But it was so cool because you would see, like, little kids would go in there and they'd be like, they'd point out, there was like this one leg of a Barbie doll, and you could see it from like 40 feet away. You could see this little leg. Did you see it? Did it just go? Yeah. Yeah, so the Barbie doll was like cool to, and once you saw the ones that were up close, you could kind of recognize what the rest of it was. So now I'm trying to make things that are bigger that are going to be part of those metronome forms. But the coolest thing is like when you send your beautiful sculpture through the industrial process. So this is the kiln shelf. So before and after this, the kiln is lined with toilet bowls, and then my garbage is like going through. And there's actually, it's cool to see it come out too, because the ceramic, it's all glazed as it going in. So it all looks kind of white as it's going in, but then when it comes out, it's all these like crazy colors. I have one, that's a picture of the mold making process when I'm making the slip casts. Some of it's made from the garbage that I found on the beach, but then also some of it is this driftwood that I found on the shore of Lake Michigan, and all of that stuff sort of mashed together. This is the kind of beginning of the mold making process. And then here's the one of the ceramics coming out of the mold. I use that orange construction net a lot in the debris. It's one of my favorite sort of materials that I use in the casts. I don't have that many pictures of the stuff that I made this last time at Kohler, but I'm gonna mail it to myself next week. So you can come to my studio on the 3rd floor of the Arts Annex, and you can see what I'm working on when I start to actually work with the stuff that I made at Kohler. And I have one more slide that I sort of couldn't help but do this in an educational setting, but all of this working with clay, kind of going back and forth between the prints and the clay, made me think about the Sumerian clay tablets, 2,270 BC. And even older, 3,000 BC. So this is a form of printing that was made 5,000 years ago. This was emerging technology at the time. This changed the media landscape at the time. This was AI. This was Instagram. This was the internet. This was the written language 5,000 years ago. And I think of us right now being in a time where media and the way we consume it is about to totally change, perhaps right today has changed the geopolitical landscape forever. And it happened before, 5,000 years ago, when the Sumerian clay tablets were first traveling across the globe. So I think it's interesting to be an art student right now. It's interesting to be an artist and a studier of the image and creating images, because I think we can look at things like this for lessons in how technology and changes in technology change the world. But that's all I have for you today. So maybe we can do questions. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, we can take some questions. So just raise your hand and I'll bring you the microphone. One over here.
Hi. I guess I really like the way you describe like urban landscapes and discarded items, like how you called the oil spills beautiful and how the harbor like organized the debris in a really amazing type of way. I feel like we kind of separate like the natural world with urbanization with discarded items, but your work seems to like blur the lines between these three worlds. I guess I was just curious, what exactly makes you gravitate towards like the urban scenes and discarded items? And is your work like is it a critique? Is it an observation? Is it a reconciliation? I don't know, I'm really curious.
I hope it's all of those things, but also engaging enough to hold your attention. I think that a lot of times, if things read immediately as a critique, it can feel a little didactic and off-putting. And so I think that artists have this really amazing capability of bringing an audience in and holding your attention. And so I hope that it does that. I also just think, though, that it's a little more complicated, like that thing that I said about trying to get the the Wallet Gallery to not say on the museum like didactics that I didn't like jet skis, because I think that artists can be both ways about things. I think that we live in a really complicated world. There's a great Slavoj Žižek video of him standing in this, I don't know if you guys have ever seen, it's like the most incredible, like he's standing in this garbage dump. I think it was made by, if you look up like Slavoj Žižek garbage dump, you'll find this video. It's only like 5 minutes long, and he has this like really great intro where there's this like sort of horrific racket happening behind him as they like shovel all of this garbage, and he says, "This is where you should feel most comfortable. Like this garbage dump is where you should feel most comfortable." And I really take that to heart. I think that why go out and like ruin Yosemite? Let's just hang out at the garbage dump. There's plenty of birds, there's plenty of wildlife at the garbage dump, there's plenty of things to explore. And I think, I mean, I'm sort of being facetious, but I really believe that exploring the New York waterways has this really great collapse of both being the garbage dump and also being an area of incredible natural resources. And I think that I see some members of my grad class here, and we were just reading Claire Bishop's Artificial Hells, and thinking about, you know, Claire Bishop sort of makes a call for artists not to become too moral and too modest. And I think that a lot of times when people see environmental art or art that sort of delves into some of these subjects, the question is like, well, like, what are you doing to be more sort of in line with the green ideology? And the answer is, you know, we all live in a really complicated world, and I think that the artist has a I don't want to say a duty, but an opportunity to engage a really that complicated path in a complicated way. So I do love oil spills.
Thank you for this beautiful lecture, and the work and your way of engaging with the river is absolutely profound, and I really appreciate your not being didactic. And at the same time, I want to ask you so many questions, but I'm just going to ask you one question about technology. And looking at this image and thinking about your boat and the type of technology that you use, and I forgot the name of the table that you said that you use, but
yeah.
What is it?
The Eldridge pilot book is where I get my tide map.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about the Lenape people, the way they navigated the river in their own self-made boats, and also made of wood and also powered by their own hands. And without having that book, knowing the river and knowing how it flows, etc. I wanted to ask you, how are you engaging with other temporalities of this space? The river and the city and the tides and the salt water fighting the fresh water and all that's there.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. I think that I think in the first few years of doing the project, when I sort of discovered the significance of the tide, I started doing some research about the Lenape's use of the tide, and I sort of had this theory that the Lenape had used Manhattan, because, you know, like Manhattan supposedly was like this place where the Lenape met to trade, and I was like, oh, this is because of the tide, because it's this crazy island in the middle of this swirling sort of this completely predictable motion. And the Lenape would have known it. They didn't need the Eldridge Tide and Pilot Book because they were paying attention to the moon and the sun and understood like the way that the tide, they could predict it just by the full moon and the where the sun was on the horizon. So it took Europeans like, you know, like 1,000 years to figure that out, but they were doing it back then. And I used to think that that the reason that the Manhattan Island was a trading center was because of the tidal cycle. That basically it was this place where, like, from a 100-mile radius, you could get to Manhattan, and then you could get away from the Manhattan using this sort of tidal clock. But I think now it's probably like way more complicated than that. And so I love thinking about the indigenous history of Manhattan, and I think that the way that I engage with it this decade, I think that I was trying to sort of like engage like contemporary Lenape at the time, but now I feel like I'm just an observer of it, and I just try to support things going on in Manhattan that have to do with waterway rights and the whole, like, there's a powwow every year in upstate New York that takes a trip down the Hudson in time for the UN Water Conference, and they do this really great basically like a parade down the New York waterway. And so I participated in that, and I've also just, gone to their lectures and things. So I think that in the beginning of sort of like understanding the indigenous relationship with the water, I wanted them to like come with me and tell me about it. And now I just want to sort of know, I just want to be an observer and like be like show up basically to those kinds of knowledges. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely like, there's definitely were people navigating in small boats using the tide for a long time. Thank you for bringing that up.
Hello. So one thing I wanted to ask about your use of different information channels like you had with finding your first passenger with the boats was I noticed that another project you did maybe like 15 years later was called Floatomancy, and you did psychic readings of the river on IG Live during the quarantine. And I just,
Yes.
I mean, saying that sentence sounds unreal enough, but do you feel like the complexity of what you were doing when you first started the tide taxis and the ability to share your experience in the first person with just about anyone who had the app, how do you begin and end a project at a time and space where there's too many variables you can control in terms of not even having to be at a place in order to inform other people about it?
Thank you for bringing up that project. That's a perfect project to sort of like answer your question about like kind of inserting like ideas into sort of the timeline and the flow, because that project started because, and it wasn't me that would do the psychic readings, it was my friend Melissa Brown, because she is more adept at this kind of understanding than I am. But basically during the pandemic, I was like, oh, the tide and current taxi is kind of off. Like, we didn't know whether it was safe for somebody to be in the boat with me. And so what I would do is instead of having people come in the boat with me, I would just do an Instagram live with somebody that was usually at home, or in some cases they would be like walking along the shore or something. And so Melissa is a friend that has this art practice where she does lithomancy readings. It's almost like a tea leaf reading, but she's sort of adapted it in a slightly silly way, kind of tongue in cheek. But she truly does like follow these kind of principles of lithomancy when she does the readings. And so we started this floatsomancy, which was me walking along the shore, like finding garbage, and her at home kind of interpreting the garbage based on the rules of lithomancy. And it was incredibly successful until we tried to predict the last election. And then it was just like, oh, huge bummer. But it was a really fun thing that kind of like, it started during the pandemic, and then we kept doing it like every I don't know, whenever we felt like it. But it was a fun way. I think, like, you know, the project kind of bumps along. It's fun having this project that just sort of lives online. It like doesn't have to. It just sort of waits for somebody to discover it. Sometimes like nobody visits it, and then sometimes it'll get a lot of visits because of some like mention of it somewhere. But the engaging Instagram in a different way was kind of another, I don't know, like another permutation of it that has. I don't know if I would do it again, but it was sort of like an interesting like way to weave with the technology. Yeah. Does that answer?
Hi, thank you so much. I'm wondering if in the last 20 years of getting to know the waterways around New York, if you have ever encountered the Billion Oyster Project and
Yes.
how that has changed the water, or if it has, or what's doing with that.
They're great. Yeah, I've worked with some of the people that have worked there, and I've I don't know, interacted with them a lot. But yeah, they're awesome. They're like the best thing that I did with them though is that one of their somebody that was in the education like sort of arm of the Billion Oyster Project. Came with me to this. There's this island in the New York Harbor that only comes out at very, very low tide. So it only comes out like once or twice a year. And we planned, so me and the Billion Oyster Project guy and another person from New Jersey all met on that island during the pandemic. And the island is actually called Oyster Island. So I was telling the Billion Oyster Project, like, you guys should plant oysters on this, because the reason it has a name even, it's just a sandbar that comes out at really low tide, but the reason it has a name is because, you know, 200 years ago when they were naming islands, it was way out of the water because of the oyster shells and the oyster beds. But when all the oysters died, it sank, the oyster beds died, and it just became the sandbar. So I was telling them, like, you should plant oysters here because you could actually like remake this island, which is called Oyster Island. And they were like, yeah, but it's not in New York City because the island is just outside the border in New Jersey. But just recently, they have decided to extend their sort of jurisdiction outside New York. So I'm going to bug them again about making Oyster Island into an island again. But yeah, they're awesome. They're a cool organization.
And have you noticed a difference since they've been doing the oysters?
They're not making any difference.
No.
No.
Might need 2 billion.
Yeah. I mean, don't tell them I said that.
We won't tell them, or Kohler.
Don't tell Kohler. Oh my God, there's so much. Turn off the recording.
I have multiple questions, but I'm gonna try to do just one. Okay, my first question is really short, and it's have you thought about using the American River in Sacramento at all?
I have. I want to go on it.
Okay, and then the other question was just like, other countries, like say Venice, use their canals as part of everyday life and everyday transport, and they have like 15 different lines for their water buses, the Vaporetto. And I feel like when you started your project in Rhode Island, it was like part of the underbelly, and it wasn't something people were going to, and it was this liminal space that people like didn't like want to access. And then moving to different like rivers and different canals, how did that change each way you looked at it? And did the river like become to life as you kept going to it and stop being like a liminal space and start being part of the environment you were in?
Yes, for sure. And I think, like, I mean, that's a great point. And sometimes I think that the New York Harbor is the only place I could do this project because of some of the things that you just said. Because in Venice, it would just be, it's so much a part of people's understanding of the city. And so I think that's what sort of works about the tide taxi in New York is that at least this year, at least in the past decade, it's been sort of an unusual way to see the city. And I think some of that is changing. And I think, I mean, maybe this goes back to the Billion Oyster Project question too. I think one thing that has changed a lot about the city in the past decade is things like the Billion Oyster Project, the North Brooklyn Boat Club that helped us do the opera, the Newtown Creek Alliance. There's so much more sort of understanding of the waterways and how the city works with its waterways. There's so many more people out on the water in small boats. And so I think like, it's definitely like in the time that I've been doing it, just that sort of awareness has changed. And you're right, it's sort of like maybe it was this kind of underground, liminal, unseen space, but now it certainly has, is changing. You know, somewhat. I feel like I still encounter people in New York that are like, I grew up in New York City, I've never been on a small boat in the water. I've never seen my neighborhood from that angle. So I think sort of, you know, there's 11 million plus people in New York City. Not all of them like sort of have that, you know, level of understanding of the waterways. So I think there's sort of liminality out there, you know, if you look for it. But certainly the project has changed a lot as I you know, do projects in other places. Thank you.
Okay, maybe we have time for one or two more. Okay, two more.
Hi, thank you. Sorry. So it seems like across your practice, you've gotten really good at building boats. And could you just maybe go more into detail about like that for you? How's that been? Like, when did you really start figuring that out? What was it like?
Yeah, I went to I actually leave this part out, but I did go to a boat building school at some point in there. But I went to the boat building school in Sausalito, California, actually, the Arquez School of Wooden Boat Building. But they would disown me if they saw my boats because I use plywood and fiberglass, and they hand build all of their boats using timber and all hand tools. It's a really incredible process. But the one thing that I did retain from that school is the ability to design the boat using a table of offsets and the process of lofting. So I can basically like design a small boat and then extrapolate through a table of offsets and make it into something like scale. And that's something that I still do from the boat school. But all my boats are made out of plywood and fiberglass. And I started by just downloading plans from the internet. You can get them for free. It's really cheap. You can cut out you can look at all the steps they tell you to do, and you can throw away like half the steps and just do it like really cheaply. And now I've done it so many times, I know like which steps you can throw away. And I've also, the boat that I use in New York is one that I designed in a 3D modeling program and built from my own pattern. So I've gotten to the point where I sort of know all the, what all the different like shapes do to the boat. I kind of think that I've made the boat that I use now, the design that I made now is like the perfect boat for the New York harbor. It has a flat transom, so I can like push it off of a beach and step right into it without getting my feet wet. And it has a really round hull, so I can sort of float over the wakes when the ferry wakes come. It also can fit 3 or 4 people comfortably, and so it's a really nice really nice boat for the tide taxi. So yeah, that's a little bit more about the boat design and the boat construction, but it is something that I love to think about and to make, and I love the way they look, and it's the making part of it is really important to me. Thank you for that question.
So these sculptures you've made, it's really cool how you can take trash and make them into art. It's really cool. Do you think we as artists could do something like this, where we could take trash and then make them into something really cool, like those sculptures you showed? Also, side question, you were talking about Sumerian clay tablets. When were they made?
The Sumerian, the date is up there. This one, the cylinder seal, is from 3,100 BC, and the Sumerian clay tablet, this one, is from 2,000 270 BC, so a very long time ago. And you can see with that cylinder seal how they were carving in stone and then sort of squashing it across clay, which is just like the coolest thing. But yes, I do think that anybody can get garbage either from the ocean or from the street and make artwork out of it. It's sort of a continually replenishing source of great material for artwork. And I think it's a really a cool way to kind of get ideas for work and actually use as a material for work. I like to think like some sculptors have like their favorite sculpture store. Maybe it's a Home Depot or a specialty sculpture store where they know what's down like every aisle. And I know the beaches of New York City, like I'm like, oh, we need, like when we made the opera, we needed this like flotation for one of the piers that we made. And I was like, oh, I know exactly where to find this. No need to buy it. It's floating out, in Jamaica Bay on this certain beach. And so a lot of the stuff that was on the opera set is actually just like junk from the beach that we sort of like retooled to be flotation, to be cushions, to be instruments, but also just really practically to be some of the things that were like floating the docks. So it's really, I think it's a great resource to use as an artist.
Well, thank you so much for the amazing lecture.
Thank you. Thank you.